Great day, everyone. This is Jason Santos, and for today, we will continue the discussion of Marketing Research 2. And today, we are already on the second part where we will cover the research process. So, let's get started. On this discussion, we will be covering the research process and its stages. Actually, these are all the 9 stages which I just conveniently numbered as a 1.1 to 1.9. But the research process, we have already seen the diagram from the previous discussion. So, with regards to the stages of the research process, it all begins with the formulation of the research problem. And in a very real sense, the problem formulation is the heart of the research process. As such, it represents the single most important step to be performed. From the researcher's point of view, problem formulation means translating the management problem into a research problem. And as previously discussed, in order to formulate an appropriate research problem, the researcher must understand the origin and nature of management's problem and then be able to rephrase it into meaningful terms from an analytical point of view. Now, this involves timely and clear communication between manager and researcher. Now, the end result of problem formulation is a statement of the management problem that is analytically meaningful and that often points the way to alternative solutions. An accurate problem formulation specifies the types of information needed to help solve the management problem. In short, quality thinking about a problem prior to data collection largely determines the quality of data collection, analysis, and problem solving. Now, here we can see some management problems translated into actual research problems. For example, the first management problem is they wanted to allocate advertising budget to media. So when you translate that or rephrase that into a research problem, it becomes an estimate awareness generated by each media type. So on and so forth. You can see how a management problem tends to be a little bit vague, um, unspecific, but when you convert it into a research problem, you wanted to specifically know, okay, how you would address that problem. And here we have a guide as to how we would formulate the problem. The closely related to problem formulation is the development of a working hypothesis or an assertion about a state of nature. So, first thing that we have to do is to specify the research objectives. The objectives guide the researcher in developing good, useful research, and they help the client evaluate the completed project. Objectives range from the very general, such as a profit maximization, to highly specific, such as measuring market interest in a new product. It is rare that the objectives are well explained to the researcher. However, the researcher needs to take the initiative to develop a clear statement of objectives. What we have to keep in mind is that each study should have a very limited and manageable set of objectives that focus on the problems that are being solved. Now, 2 or 3 well-targeted objectives is preferable to many that are ill-conceived, and a fewer the objectives make it easier to keep track of progress towards the objectives. To ensure that each is properly addressed and to determine the best methodology if there are too many objectives, separate studies may be appropriate. So, second, we have to determine the environment or the context of the problem. So, these are all opened for with the word specify. So we have to consider the problem of deciding whether to introduce a new consumer product. The marketing researcher must work closely with the client in transforming the client's problem into a workable research problem. The researcher's effort should be oriented towards helping the manager decide whether any investigation is justified based on the potential value of the research findings versus their cost. The researcher must also be aware of and assist in the identification of objectives, courses of action, environmental variables insofar as they affect the design of research investigation. Now, the third step is for us to specify the nature of the problem. Now, every research problem may be evaluated on a scale that ranges from very simple to very complex. The degree of complexity depends on the number of variables that influence the problem. Understanding the nature of the problem helps a researcher ensure that the right problem is being investigated and that a marketing plan can be developed to solve the problem. A thorough preliminary investigation using focus groups of consumers, salespeople, managers, or others close to the problem may produce the much needed insight. Number four, we have to specify the alternative courses of action. A course of action specifies a behavioral sequence that occurs over time, such as the adoption of a new package design or introduction of a new product. A program of action becomes a commitment made in the present to follow some behavioral patterns in the future. It is usually desirable to generate as many alternatives as possible during the problem formulation stage and state them in the form of research hypothesis to be examined. A hypothesis often implies a possible course of action with a prediction of the outcome if that course of action is followed. Now, once the nature of problem has been agreed upon, the course of action must be specified. Okay, and then the consequences of alternative courses of action should be defined clearly. And I will have an example of that in the succeeding slide. A set of consequences always relate to courses of action. We have a popular saying that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And this even to the occurrence of events not under the control of the manager. So sometimes these are outside the control of even the brightest of the managers. One of the manager's primary jobs is to anticipate and communicate the possible outcomes of various courses of action that may result from following the research. And then number six would be the degrees of uncertainty. Now, most marketing problems are characterized by a situation of uncertainty as to which course of action is best. The years of experience may allow the decision making manager to assign various likelihoods of occurrence to the various possible outcomes of specific courses of action. A carefully formulated problem and statement of research purpose is necessary for competent research. The statement of purpose involves a translation of the decision maker's problem into a research problem and the derivation of a study design from this problem formulation. So, as I have mentioned earlier, we have this case of new Coke versus the original Coke. And I'm sure if you are studying marketing, you have stumbled upon this story or case in the past. In the mid 1980s, the Coca Cola Company made a decision to introduce a new beverage product. And the company had evidence that taste was the single most important cause of Coke's decline in the market share in the late 1970s and early 1980s. A new product dubbed as a new Coke was developed that was sweeter than the original formula Coke. Almost 200,000 blind product taste tests were conducted in the United States, and more than one half of the participants favored the new Coke over the original formula and Pepsi. The new product was introduced and the original formula was withdrawn from the market. This turned out to be a big mistake. Eventually, the company reintroduced the original formula as Coke Classic, or the original Coke, uh, tried to market the two products, and ultimately, new Coke was withdrawn from the market. So, what went wrong here is that uh, there are actually two things that stand out. The first one was there was a flaw in the market research. Okay, they have depend on the research taste tests that were conducted. So they assumed that the taste was just or the only deciding factor in consumer purchase behavior, whereas consumers were not told that only the product would be marketed. Thus, they were not asked whether they would give up the original formula for the new Coke. And then, second, no one realized the symbolic value and the emotional involvement of the people had with the original Coke. The bottom line in on this is that relevant variables that would affect the problem solution were not included in the research. So that was the problem. The emotional investment of people, and they did not realize that when they choose the new Coke, they would have to give up old Coke, okay, which wasn't what they wanted all along. So now we go to the second stage, which is the method of inquiry. Market researchers look at scientific method as the source of their investigative methods. Even though this method is not the only one that is used, it is the standard against which investigative methods are measured. The scientific method makes great use of existing knowledge both as a starting point for investigation and as a check on the results of the investigation or tests of validity. Its more distinctive characteristic is its total lack of subjectivity. The scientific method has evolved objective and rigid procedures for verifying hypotheses or evaluating evidence. It is analytical in its process and is investigator independent. Thus, the scientific method is for the most part logical and objective and frequently makes extensive use of mathematical reasoning and complicated experiments. So, the goal of scientific methodologies uh, is also called an objectivist is to run a hypothesis test using publicly stated procedures that are investigator independent. So on the right side, you can actually see the cycle where you would have to observe, you create a question, make a hypothesis, experiment, reach a conclusion, and the result. A thorough explanation of that is available in this slide. Okay, like for the observation, this is the problem awareness phase, which involves observing a set of significant factors, formulation of hypothesis, prediction of the future after the hypothesis has been formulated, and then you test the hypothesis. One good application of this is this case wherein you have a t-shirt uh, seller. Okay, observation phase, the researcher or the t-shirt seller notices some competitors sales that are increasing and that many competitors have shifted to the new plastic wrapping. So let's assume that they like the new packaging or wrapping, and that's what the seller has observed. So he formulated a hypothesis. He assumed that his clients' products are of similar quality and that the plastic wrapping is the sole cause of increased competitor sale. So he already made that assumption, and that's the problem. And he made a prediction of the future, whereas the sales will increase if he shifts to a new wrapping. Okay? And then the client produces some shirts in new packaging and market tests them. However, Again, this is not a guarantee. Okay. Um, the testing actually is more of a trial and error phase. Okay, because again, if we would go back to number two, the hypothesis was just form based from merely observation, and then the true acid test for this is whether the customers will be buying the same t-shirt if it is just packaged differently. Okay, so that's how important the formulation of the problem is, and what method of inquiry will be following. Okay, so now we go to the research method. Whether a particular method of inquiry is appropriate for a research problem, it depends in large part on the nature of the problem itself and the extent or level of existing knowledge. In addition to selecting a method of inquiry, the research planner must also select a research method. Okay? There are two broad methodologies that can be used to answer any research question. One is the experimental research, and the other is the non experimental research. The major advantage of experimental research lies in the ability to control extraneous variables and manipulate one or more variables by the intervention of the investigator. In the non experimental research, there is no intervention beyond that is needed for purpose of measurement. So here, we have a battle between choosing an experimental design or a non-experimental design. Stage 4 is a research design. Okay, for this we will just define what research design is. Research design is defined as the specific methods and procedures for acquiring the information. It is a plan or organizational framework for doing the study and collecting the data. We will discuss this research design in depth later on in the succeeding chapters, actually in chapter 3. Stage 5 would have to be data collection techniques. Okay. The research design begins to take on detailed focus as the researcher selects the particular techniques to be used in solving the problem, and then formulated and in carrying out the method selected. A number of techniques available for collecting data can be used. Some techniques are unique to a method of inquiry. For example, many of the qualitative research techniques, such as projective techniques, are used only in subjectivist type research. In general, data collection uses either communication or observation. When you talk of communication, it involves asking questions and receiving responses. Okay, now this process can be done in person. You can do it through email. Now we have what we call as the Google Forms, online surveys. You have social media and many more. In most instances, this constitutes the broad research technique known as the survey. So that's the most common one. In contrast to this process, data may be obtained by observing present or past behavior. Regarding past behavior, data collection techniques include looking at secondary data such as company records, reviewing studies published by journals, and examining physical traces such as erosion or aggression. Okay, in order to collect data from these things that I have mentioned, there must be a means of recording responses or behavior. Thus, the process of measurement and development of the instrument or measurement instrument or a questionnaire are closely connected to the decision of which data collection techniques will be used. Okay? Relationship is two-way. That is, the structure and content of measurement instrument can depend on the data collection technique. And the measurement considerations often influence the technique selection. The sample design must be consistent with the relevant population, which is usually specified in the problem formulation stage of the research process. This allows the data obtained from the sample to be used in making inferences about the larger population. The process of sample selection may be done by probability or non probability methods. In probability sampling, every element in the population has no non zero probability chance of being selected for inclusion. In contrast, a non probability sample is one selected on the basis of the judgment of the investigator uh, for the convenience or by some other means not involving the use of probabilities. On stage 7, we have the data collection, which begins after the first previous 6 stages of the research process. And once they are complete, the data collection, whether by communication or observation, requires the use of data collection personnel, which then raises question regarding managing these people. Because data collection can be costly, firms often utilize outside limited service research suppliers, particularly when the extent of in house research activity does not warrant the cost of having permanent data collection personnel. Also, project design may require specialized data collection, which might best be obtained from an outside supplier. So, some companies will hire a third party data collection officer, okay, because having one would just not be practical or convenient for them because they do not do research or marketing research all the time. Now, the working relationship between the data collection agency and the research supplier or client is a major factor affecting the quality of fieldwork and data collection. Okay. Stage 8 is the analysis and interpretation. Now, the data that are obtained and presented in the same form as originally collected are seldom useful to anyone. The data must be analyzed, edited, coded, and tabulated before performing formal analysis such as statistical tests. The types of analysis that can be properly performed depend upon the sampling procedures, the measurement instruments, and data collection techniques used. Consequently, it is imperative that the techniques of analysis associated descriptive or prescriptive recommendation types and presentation formats be selected prior to the data collection. And finally, we have the research report. The, cul- the culmination of the research process is the research report. It includes a clear, accurate, and honest description of everything that has been done and the results, conclusions, and whenever possible, recommendations for courses of action. Two critical attributes of reports are that it provides all the information readers need using language they understand, the completeness, and it contains selective information chosen by the researcher, or the conciseness. Now, these attributes are often in conflict with one another. There are actually two types of reports that are being produced, and these are grounded on the two approaches that can be taken to ensure that this conflict is not a problem. One approach involves preparing the technical report. Okay, technical report emphasizes the methods used and underlying assumptions and presents the findings in a very detailed manner. And the second one would be the popular report. Okay, so popular report makes this feel and look general, digestible for any type of audience or reader, minimizes the technical details, and emphasizes simplicity. Okay. The second approach is concerned with how the report is communicated, because people vary a great deal in how they are affected by the different forms of communication. The ideal reporting process should try to encompass all major forms. So again, the company may prepare both of these reports. The technical report goes inside, while the popular report can be published to the rest of the stakeholders, the consumers, and the like. Now, for your assignment, using the steps in formulating the research problem in slide number 5, I need for you to write down one general problem based from the title that you have created, and then three sub-problems for the same title, making it a total of four problems for your marketing research. Okay, so I hope you have learned something from this discussion, and I will see you on the next video and the continuation of our discussion on marketing research. Thank you so much. Stay safe and God bless everyone.